Her sisters took everything but forgot the equipment shed their father left her. What she found inside, it wasn't just old tools. It was the truth that would finally set her free. And if you've ever felt left behind or underestimated, I think this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because we're all about that here. Now let's get into it. The day it all started was my 18th birthday. There was no cake, no party. Just a manila envelope on a metal desk in an office that smelled like stale coffee and quiet desperation. It was the color of everything in the system. A tired, non-committal beige that promised nothing. Mrs. Albright, my caseworker for the last 2 years, slid it across the desk. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. "Happy birthday, Maya," she said, her voice practiced and smooth. "You're officially an adult. Congratulations." It didn't feel like a congratulations. It felt like an eviction notice. 2 years of group homes, 2 years of shared bathrooms and meals on a schedule, 2 years of pretending I wasn't waiting for a life that had been paused the moment my dad died. And now the pause button was being released. The envelope had my name on it, typed in a severe, blocky font. Inside was a single key, heavy and old-fashioned, attached to a brittle plastic tag, and a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. The key felt cold and real in my palm, a small, dense piece of a world I no longer belonged to. Mrs. Albright cleared her throat. "That's your inheritance," she explained, as if I couldn't read the letterhead. "The estate has been settled. Your sisters, as the primary heirs, have taken possession of the family home and the associated liquid assets. Per your father's will, you have been bequeathed the property's secondary structure, the equipment shed, and its contents, the equipment shed." I almost laughed. Of course. My older sisters, Dana and Claire, had always been a unit. After Dad's accident, they were 17 and 19, old enough to be convincing. They'd painted a picture of me to social services. A troubled, difficult kid their grieving hearts just couldn't handle. It was easier to let the state take me than to deal with another mouth to feed, another person with a claim to the life they wanted. They'd visited once in 2 years, a stilted, awkward meeting in a visitation room where they told me they were selling the house. They said it was for the best. Too many memories. What they meant was, too much value to let a piece of it go to me. I had assumed they'd sold it already, but the letter was clear. They hadn't sold it, they'd kept it, and they had left me the shed. A 10 by 12-foot box of rotting timber and peeling paint at the back of a half-acre lot. It was a final, petty insult, delivered by proxy through a lawyer I'd never met and a caseworker who just wanted to close my file. I looked at the key. It was a skeleton key, the kind you see in old movies. The tag attached to it was so faded I could barely make out the scrawled word. "Shed." "Is that all?" I asked. My voice was flat. I was an expert at flatness. It was a shield. Mrs. Albright gave a small, sympathetic shrug. "There's a bus ticket to Oak Haven and a cashier's check for $500. To help you get settled." Settled where? In the shed? The absurdity of it was a bitter pill. $500 and a key to a glorified lawnmower garage. That was what my 18 years, my entire connection to the man who had raised me, amounted to. "Your sisters signed off on it," she added, her gaze dropping to my file on her desk. "It's all legal and binding, legal and binding." The 2 cruelest words in the English language. I stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say goodbye. I just took the envelope, the key a heavy weight in its thin paper confines, and walked out of the office. The hallway was the same beige as the envelope. The air was the same recycled stillness. I walked past the common room, where a couple of younger kids were watching cartoons, their faces slack and pale in the blue light of the screen. For 2 years I had been one of them. Now I was just a ghost with a key to a shed. My entire future felt as small and dark as the inside of that forgotten building. I didn't know then that the smallest, darkest places can hold the most light. I just knew I was alone. I was 18, and I had been given the scraps from a table I was no longer invited to sit at. The bus ride was the first step into that future, and I had no idea where I was going. The lawyer's office was somehow even more beige than the group home. It was an older, more expensive beige, the kind that spoke of quiet money and dusty legal precedents. The air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Mr. Davies, the lawyer whose name was on the letterhead, was a man made of soft edges and muted colors. His suit was gray, his hair was gray, and his eyes had a tired, watery quality, like a sky that had been rained out. He looked at me over a pair of half-moon glasses, his desk a fortress of neatly stacked files. "Miss Collier," he said, gesturing to a stiff leather chair that sighed as I sat down. "I am sorry we are meeting under these circumstances. I was your father's attorney for many years." I just nodded, clutching the strap of my backpack. It contained everything I owned. A few changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book Dad had given me, and the manila envelope. The $500 check felt like a hot coal in my pocket. "I don't understand," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "The house. My sisters. They told me they were selling it." Mr. Davies folded his hands on his desk. It was a slow, deliberate movement. "They intended to, or at least that is what they stated. However, the market in Oakhaven is particular. They received offers they deemed insufficient. For now, they have decided to retain the property. They use it for weekends, I believe. A country escape, a country escape. My home. The place where I'd learned to ride a bike. Where Dad had put up a tire swing on the old oak tree. Where my mom's ghost still lived in the scent of the rose bushes by the porch. It was now a weekend getaway for the two people who had thrown me away. A fresh wave of cold anger washed over me, so sharp it was almost clarifying. "And me?" I asked. "The shed." He slid a document across the polished wood of his desk. It was a copy of the will. His finger, with its neatly trimmed nail, pointed to a specific clause. "To my youngest daughter, Maya Collier, I bequeath the outbuilding located at the rear of the property, commonly known as the equipment shed, and all of its contents, to be transferred to her on her 18th birthday." "Your father was very specific," Mr. Davies said gently. "I drafted this with him a few months before his accident. He was insistent on this point, insistent. Why? Why insist on leaving me a dilapidated shack? Felt like a joke. A cruel, posthumous prank. Its contents," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "What contents? A rusty lawnmower? Some old rakes?" Mr. Davies's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. A hint of something that wasn't pity. Maybe it was patience. "I do not know, Maya. Your father brought me the revised will, and that clause was already written in his own hand. He simply asked me to formalize it. He said it was important that you have a place of your own. Something no one could take from you." The irony was suffocating. "A place of my own that was on land they owned. A place I couldn't even get to without trespassing on their weekend retreat. So I own the shed, but not the ground it's on?" "Correct. Your sisters, as the primary property owners, are legally obligated to provide you with access to your structure. They cannot bar you from the property. I have already sent them a letter to that effect." He said it with a quiet satisfaction that made me think he didn't much care for my sisters. It was a small comfort. "And what am I supposed to do with it?" I asked, the question hanging in the quiet, stuffy air. "Live in it." He gave a slight, dry cough. "The structure is not zoned for residential use. It has no plumbing, no electricity to speak of. It is, for all legal purposes, a storage facility, so my inheritance was a locker. A locker I had to travel 100 miles to visit. The whole thing was a farce. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the precursor to tears I refused to shed in this man's office. I had cried enough in the last 2 years to last a lifetime. "Your father," Mr. Davies said, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping. "He was a good man, practical man. He wasn't cruel. I know this might not make sense to you right now, but I would urge you not to dismiss his intentions out of hand." He looked at the old key sitting on the will. "He gave me that key to hold for you. He told me, when she's old enough, she'll know what to do with it." I don't know what he meant, Maya. But he believed in you. The words hit me harder than the legal jargon. He believed in you. It was a voice from the past, a ghost in the room. I hadn't heard anyone say that in a long, long time. I thought of my father. Not the man in the months after Mom died, who was quiet and distant with grief, but the man before. The man who taught me how to tie my shoes, who showed me the constellations in the night sky, who smelled of sawdust and gasoline and always had time for one more story. He wasn't cruel. He was practical. What was the practical purpose of a shed? I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of old books and settled dust. Okay, I said, surprising myself. Okay, what do I do now? Now, Mr. Davies said, a small, approving smile finally touching his lips. You take that bus ticket, you go to Oak Haven, and you see what your father left you. The bus groaned out of the city, leaving behind the gray concrete and the endless grid of streets that had been my prison for 2 years. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the landscape slowly soften and blur. Skyscrapers gave way to office parks, then to strip malls, then to suburbs with their identical houses and manicured lawns. Soon, even those faded, replaced by wide, open fields and dense patches of forest. The world turned green and gold under the afternoon sun. I hadn't seen this much open space since before the accident. It was overwhelming. The city had been suffocating, but its tight confines were also a kind of container. Out here, there was nothing to hold you in. The emptiness felt vast and terrifying. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my father's face. It was getting harder. The sharp details were blurring, softening into a general impression of kindness and sadness. I could remember the feel of his calloused hand holding mine, the low rumble of his laugh. But his eyes, the exact shade of his hair, those were slipping away, like a photograph left out in the sun. I clutched the key in my pocket. It was the only solid thing I had left of him. A piece of metal he had touched, a key to a door he had locked. The bus smelled of diesel fumes and stale air freshener. A baby cried a few rows behind me. A thin, reedy wail that set my teeth on edge. An old man across the aisle was snoring, his head lolling against the window. It was a bus full of people in transit, all of us suspended between a place we had left and a place we had not yet reached. I was the most suspended of all. What was I going to find in Oak Haven? The town existed in my memory as a series of childhood snapshots. The creak of the porch swing, the taste of wild strawberries from the woods behind our house, the echoing quiet of the main street on a Sunday morning. But that was a child's memory. It wasn't real. The reality was a house that was no longer mine and a shed that was. The bus rumbled on, a tiny metal box moving through an enormous, indifferent landscape. I thought about my sisters. Dana, the practical one, the one who always had a plan. Claire, the beautiful one, the one who could charm her way out of any trouble. I used to adore them. I used to follow them around like a lost puppy, desperate for their approval. After Mom died, they had closed ranks, forming a tight, impenetrable circle of two. I was on the outside. When Dad was gone, too, there was no one left to hold the door open for me. They said it was too painful to stay in the house with me there, a constant reminder of what they'd lost. But they were the ones who got to stay. I was the one who was sent away. I wondered if they would be there. The lawyer said they used it on weekends. It was a Thursday. Maybe I would be lucky. Maybe I could slip in, unlock the shed, and slip out without having to see them. Without having to endure their pity, or their false sympathy, or worst of all, their justification. The sky began to darken, the greens and golds of the countryside deepening into blues and purples. The bus pulled into a small depot, the brakes hissing. Oak Haven, the driver called out, his voice gravelly. I was the only one who got off. The air hit me first. It was clean and cool, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. It was the smell of my childhood. For a moment, it was so overwhelming that I couldn't move. I just stood on the cracked pavement, my backpack slung over my shoulder, and breathed. The town was just as I remembered it, and completely different. The storefronts were the same, the old hardware store, the diner with the flickering neon sign, the small grocery. But they looked smaller, more tired. The paint was peeling. A few were boarded up. This wasn't the idyllic small town of my memory. It was a place that was struggling, a place that time was slowly leaving behind. My old house was a 2-mile walk from the bus depot. I didn't have money for a cab, and besides, I wanted to walk. I needed to feel the ground under my feet, to reacquaint myself with the place I once called home. The sun had set, and the streetlights cast long, lonely pools of yellow light on the pavement. My footsteps echoed in the quiet. As I got closer, my heart started to beat faster. Each house I passed was a memory. The Miller's house where I'd gone for piano lessons. The Hendersons with their perpetually barking beagle. And then there it was, at the end of a long gravel driveway, half hidden by overgrown lilac bushes. My house. There were no lights on. A new, expensive-looking SUV was parked in the driveway, a stark black shape in the twilight. My sisters were here. My stomach twisted. I stopped at the edge of the property, hidden in the shadows of a large maple tree. The house looked the same, but it felt wrong. It was a stranger. I could see the tire swing, still hanging from the old oak, its rope frayed, the tire cracked. A relic of a life that was over. I took a deep breath, my hand closing around the key in my pocket. I wasn't here for the house. I was here for the shed. I just had to get to it. I waited in the shadows for what felt like an hour, my body rigid with tension. The house remained dark and silent. Maybe they had gone out. Maybe they were asleep. Or maybe they weren't here at all, and the SUV was just left over from their last visit. I couldn't wait forever. The night was getting cold, and the quiet was starting to feel less like peace and more like a threat. Taking a slow, deep breath, I slipped out from behind the tree and started down the gravel driveway. My sneakers crunched on the stones, the sound deafening in the stillness. I winced with every step, convinced that a light would flick on, a door would fly open, and I would be caught in a beam of accusing light. But nothing happened. The house remained a dark, sleeping giant. The main house sat on the front half of the lot. The backyard, where the shed was, sloped down toward a thick line of trees that marked the edge of the property. I skirted the side of the house, staying close to the overgrown bushes. The scent of roses, faint and sweet, hung in the air. Mom's roses. My sisters hadn't bothered to tear them out. Or maybe they just hadn't gotten around to it yet. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the gentle slope, almost swallowed by the encroaching woods. The shed. It was smaller than I remembered, and in worse shape. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. The paint, once a cheerful barn red, was now a patchwork of faded pink and raw, gray wood. The windows were clouded with grime, and one was cracked. It looked abandoned, forgotten. It looked exactly like I felt. I crept down the damp grass of the lawn, my eyes fixed on the shed. The main door was secured with a heavy, rusty hasp and a modern, brass-colored padlock. My heart sank. Of course, they wouldn't have left the old lock. They would have secured it. But the key in my pocket was a skeleton key. It wouldn't fit a modern padlock. I stood there for a long moment, defeated. It was all for nothing. I had come all this way for a door I couldn't even open. The anger and frustration were so intense I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up a rock and hurl it through the window of the main house. But I didn't. I just stood there, breathing in the cold night air, feeling the familiar sting of helplessness. Then I remembered what Mr. Davies had said. Your father was a practical man. He wouldn't have given me a key that didn't work. I took a closer look at the shed. There had to be another way. I walked around the side, pushing through thorny bushes that snagged at my jeans. The back of the shed was almost completely covered in ivy. But as I ran my hands over the rough, leafy wall, my fingers brushed against something hard and flat. Wood. There was another door. It was smaller, barely visible beneath the thick blanket of green. It was a low door, almost like a cellar entrance with old rusted iron hinges. And in the center of it was a keyhole that looked ancient and ornate. It was a perfect match for the key in my pocket. My breath caught. He had hidden it. My father had known they would change the main lock. He had left me a secret way in. With trembling hands, I pulled the key from my pocket. Felt warm now, charged with a new significance. I knelt in the damp grass and slid the key into the lock. It was stiff at first, I had to jiggle it, pushing with a gentle, steady pressure. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. Then, with a loud, grating click that echoed in the quiet yard, the lock gave way. The sound was like a gunshot. I froze, my eyes darting back toward the dark house. I waited, listening, my heart pounding against my ribs. Silence. No lights. No sound. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I pulled the small door open. It groaned in protest, its hinges screaming after years of disuse. A wave of musty, cold air washed over me. The smell of dust, dry rot, and something else. Something metallic and oily. It was the smell of my father's workshop. I crawled through the low opening into absolute darkness. I fumbled in my backpack for my phone, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I turned on the flashlight, and the narrow beam cut through the blackness, illuminating a world frozen in time. The shed was packed to the rafters, not with rakes and lawnmowers but with tools, serious tools. A massive table saw stood in the center of the room, covered in a dusty canvas tarp. A drill press, a lathe, shelves lined every wall, sagging under the weight of toolboxes, jars of screws and nails, and stacks of lumber. It was a complete woodworker's shop. My dad had loved woodworking. It was his escape. In the evenings and on weekends, he would disappear into the shed and emerge hours later, covered in sawdust, holding a beautifully crafted box, or a small toy, or a piece of furniture. It was his magic. And in the center of it all, sitting on a workbench beneath the grimy window, was a heavy metal box. It was an old army surplus footlocker, painted olive drab, with the words U.S. Army stenciled on the side. It was secured with a simple latch, not a lock. My light beam traced the edges of the box, then fell on a small, yellowed envelope taped to the lid. My name was written on it, in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. Maya. Just my name. My legs felt weak. I sank onto a dusty stool, the phone's light trembling in my hand. This was it. This was the contents. Not the tools. Not the shed itself. This box. This was what he had left for me. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely tear the envelope open. Felt like sacrilege, like disturbing a tomb. The paper was old and brittle. Inside was a single, folded sheet of lined notebook paper. The words were written in the same blocky capitals as my name on the envelope. The combination is the day I lost my wings. The day you arrived. 6 digits. I stared at the note, my mind racing. The day I lost my wings? It sounded like a riddle from a fantasy novel. Then it hit me. My mom. Her name was Angela. My dad always called her his angel. His wings. She died on my 10th birthday. The day she died was the day he lost his wings. The day you arrived. That was my birthday too. I looked at the footlocker again. It didn't have a combination lock. The note didn't make sense. I ran my hands over the cold metal surface, the flashlight beam dancing across the stenciled letters. My fingers found a small, almost invisible seam near the bottom. It wasn't a footlocker. It was a safe. A very clever, very well-disguised safe. The latch on the top was a decoy. The rail lock was a small, circular dial hidden under a hinged flap near the base, painted the same olive drab as the rest of the box. It was almost invisible. My breath hitched. He was so clever, so practical. The date of Mom's death. My birthday. 0-8-1-5-0-6. August 15th, 2006. With a shaking hand, I spun the dial. Right to 8. Left past 8 to 15. Right to 6. I pulled on the latch. Nothing. My heart plummeted. I tried again, my movements more careful this time. The day you arrived. Maybe he meant my birth date. I tried my own birthday. Nothing. I sat back on the stool, frustration and grief warring inside me. What did it mean? I read the note again. The day I lost my wings. The day you arrived. It was the same day. He wasn't giving me 2 different clues. He was describing one day. My 10th birthday. The day my mother died. The day our family shattered. The day I arrived in a new, broken world. I looked at the numbers again. August 15th, '06. Maybe it wasn't the American date format. Maybe he meant day, month, year. August 15th, '06. I spun the dial again, my hope dwindling with every turn. Right to 15. Left past 15 to 8. Right to 6. I held my breath and pulled the heavy latch. This time, I heard a soft, satisfying thunk. The heavy lid of the safe lifted a fraction of an inch. I cried out a small, choked sound. I pried it open. The inside was lined with felt, and it was filled to the brim. On top was a thick stack of letters, tied with a simple piece of twine. Beneath the letters were stacks of cash. $100 bills, neatly wrapped in paper bands. I lifted one out. The band said $10,000. There were at least 10, maybe 12 of those stacks. My mind couldn't process the number. Over $100,000. Sitting in a dusty shed. I pushed the money aside, my hands going for the letters. This was the real treasure. The money was shocking, but the letters were a voice from the dead. I untied the twine. The top letter was addressed to me. My dearest Maya, it began. I had to stop and take a breath, my vision blurring with tears. I hadn't seen his handwriting, his words, in so long. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and continued reading, the thin beam of my phone light illuminating the page. If you are reading this, then I am gone and you are 18. I am so sorry, little bird. I am sorry for everything. I am sorry I had to leave you. I am sorry for what your sisters have become. I need you to understand. It is the most important thing to me, that you understand. My whole body was shaking. I read on, devouring his words, his explanations, his love. He wrote about my mother's illness, a long, slow decline that had drained their savings. He wrote about the debt he was left with, a mountain he could never hope to climb. He wrote about the accident at the lumber mill, the one that crippled his leg and left him unable to work his old job. I knew I didn't have much time, he wrote. The doctors were clear. The damage was done. And I looked at your sisters and I saw their mother's fear. They were afraid of losing everything. That fear made them hard. It made them selfish. I tried to talk to them, but they wouldn't listen. They saw you as another burden, another mouth to feed. They didn't see you, Maya. They just saw a cost. A tear dripped from my chin onto the page, smudging the ink. He saw it. He saw it all. I couldn't leave you to them, the letter continued. They would have taken everything from you and given you nothing in return. The state, the system, it's a terrible choice. I know it is, but it was the only way to protect what I was saving for you. If I had left you the money directly as a minor, they would have become your guardians. They would have controlled it. They would have spent it. For your care, they would have said. But it would have been gone. It all clicked into place. The cruelty, the abandonment. It wasn't just selfishness. It was a plan. His plan. He had to make it look like he was leaving me nothing so my sisters wouldn't fight for guardianship. He had to sacrifice me to the system to save my future. The shed was a Trojan horse. A worthless gift that no one would look at twice. Inside it, he had hidden my real inheritance. A new start. A chance. The money in this box is everything I could scrape together, he wrote. It's not a fortune, but it's a foundation. It's from the sale of my tools, my truck, a few other things I sold off quietly before the end. And there is one other thing. The most important thing. The equipment in this shed. It's not just for woodworking, Maya. It's a business, he went on to explain. The tools were for crafting custom furniture, but there was a specific high-end niche luthiery. Building guitars. He had been teaching himself, learning the craft. The last letter in the stack wasn't a letter at all. It was a business plan. And a deed. The deed wasn't for the shed. It was for a 5-acre plot of undeveloped woodland, about a mile from the house, bought and paid for years ago, held in a trust that had just matured on my 18th birthday. Mr. Davies's name was on it as the trustee. My father had left me land. My own land. Untouchable. The shed wasn't my home. It was my school. It was my armory. He hadn't left me a shack. He had left me a life. I sat there in the dark, dusty shed, the letters in my lap, the smell of old wood and oil in the air, and I cried. I cried for my father, for the impossible choice he had to make. I cried for the lost years, for the loneliness and the fear, and for the first time in a very long time, I cried with a devastating, earth-shattering hope. The tears eventually subsided, leaving behind a hollowed-out, echoing calm. I sat on that dusty stool for what felt like hours, the phone's battery slowly dying, the beam of light growing weaker. The world had been turned upside down. The story I had told myself for 2 years, the story of abandonment, of being worthless, of being forgotten, was a lie. It was a story born of pain, but the truth was something else entirely. It was a story of sacrifice, of a desperate, brilliant, heartbreaking love. My father hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. He had packed me away in a safe place, like the money in this box, waiting for the day I was old enough to claim myself. The anger I felt toward my sisters was still there, a hot coal in my gut. But it was different now. It was no longer the impotent rage of a victim. It was the focused anger of someone who finally understood the game. They hadn't just been cruel. They had been greedy and blind. They had walked past this shed 100 times, seeing only a worthless pile of junk. They had looked at me and seen the same thing. They had underestimated both me and my father. I folded the letters carefully, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. His voice was so clear on the page, so full of love and regret and fierce, protective strength. He had trusted me. He had trusted that I would be strong enough to survive the system. He had trusted that I would be smart enough to find the key, to solve the riddle, to understand his plan. He had trusted me to become the person he knew I could be. And what about you? Have you ever had a moment where the story you told yourself about your past was suddenly turned on its head? Where you discovered that something you thought was an act of cruelty was actually an act of protection? It's a disorienting, world-shattering feeling. If this is hitting you, if you've ever had to piece together the truth from fragments left behind, I want you to know you're not alone. This community is for people who get it. So if you haven't yet, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We're in this together. Now back to that shed. Sitting there in the near darkness, I felt a shift inside me. The fear that had been my constant companion for 2 years began to recede, replaced by something new. Determination. It was a cold, hard, unfamiliar feeling, but it was solid. It was real. I had a choice to make. I could take the money, all $120,000 of it, and disappear. I could go anywhere, start a new life, and never look back. I could leave the shed, the tools, the town, and my sisters behind forever. It was the easy choice, the safe choice. No one would blame me, or I could stay. I could stay and do what my father had wanted. I could use the tools. I could learn the craft he had started to learn. I could build something on the land he had left for me. I could build a life here, in the shadow of the home that had been stolen from me, not out of spite, but out of love for him. It was the harder choice, the terrifying choice. It meant facing my sisters. It meant staying in a town full of ghosts. It meant pouring my heart and soul into a business I knew nothing about. It meant honoring a plan laid out by a dead man. I looked around the shed. The beam of my phone's flashlight was a tiny spotlight now, barely illuminating the space around me. It fell on the lathe, a complex machine of gears and belts. It fell on a stack of beautiful, aged wood in the corner, maple, rosewood, spruce. The raw materials for a guitar. My father believed I could do this. He had left me not just the tools, but the instructions. He had left me a map. To walk away would be to say he was wrong. To say his sacrifice was for nothing. I closed the lid of the safe. The thunk of the metal latch was a sound of finality. A decision made. I wasn't going anywhere. This shed wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. This was my inheritance. Not the money. Not the land. The choice. The chance to build something from the dust and the darkness. The chance to become the person my father always believed I could be. I would learn to build guitars. I would build a workshop on his land. I would make something beautiful out of all this ugliness. And I would do it right here where they could all see me. Not for them, For him. And for me. My phone finally died, plunging the shed into absolute, total blackness. But for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The first light of dawn was a thin, gray line under the crack of the hidden door. I had spent the night in the shed, curled on a pile of dusty canvases, the metal safe a cold, solid presence beside me. I hadn't slept. My mind was a whirlwind of plans, fears, and my father's words, replaying over and over again. I felt strangely calm. The exhaustion was a heavy blanket, but underneath it, the new, hard core of determination was unshaken. I had a purpose. It was the first time I'd felt that in years. When the light was strong enough to see by, I pushed open the small door and crawled out into the cool morning air. The world was washed in the soft, pearly light of sunrise. The lawn was wet with dew. The main house was still quiet. I needed to move the safe. Couldn't leave it here. It was heavy, but manageable. Adrenaline gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I dragged it out of the shed and, using an old wheelbarrow I found behind a bush, I managed to wrestle it up the lawn and onto the gravel driveway. My plan was simple. I would walk back to town, find the cheapest motel I could, and call a cab to come get me in the box. Then I would call Mr. Davies. I was halfway up the driveway, my breath fogging in the chilly air, my muscles screaming in protest, when the front door of the house opened. My blood ran cold. It was Claire. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a silk robe, holding a mug of coffee. Her hair was a messy blonde halo, and even half asleep and makeup-free, she was beautiful. It was the kind of effortless beauty that had always made me feel clumsy and plain. She squinted into the morning light, her eyes falling on me, then on the wheelbarrow, then on the olive-drab metal box. Her expression shifted from sleepy confusion to sharp, suspicious curiosity. "Maya," she said, her voice husky, "what on earth are you doing?" I froze, my hands still gripping the handles of the wheelbarrow. So much for slipping away unnoticed. "It's my 18th birthday," I said, my voice steady, far steadier than I felt. "I came to get my inheritance." Claire's eyes narrowed. She walked down the porch steps, her bare feet silent on the damp flagstones. She circled the wheelbarrow, her gaze fixed on the safe. "Your inheritance? Dad left you the shed, and its contents," I said, quoting the will. Her lips thinned. She knew. Of course she knew. She just hadn't cared enough to look. "What is that?" she asked, gesturing at the box with her mug. "Just some of Dad's old army junk." I tried to keep my voice casual, but it was impossible to hide the tension. At that moment, the front door opened again. It was Dana. She was already dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a fleece jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She took in the scene with one quick, appraising glance. Dana didn't do confusion. She did immediate calculation. "What's going on?" she demanded, her eyes locking on mine. "Maya was just leaving," Claire said. "She found this old trunk in the shed." Dana walked over, her expression unreadable. She was always the harder one to read. Claire was emotional, Dana was tactical. Dana looked from the box to my face, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She was remembering. "Dad's old footlocker," she said slowly. "I haven't seen that in years. He always kept it in his workshop." She looked at me, a flicker of something, suspicion, maybe even greed in her eyes. "What's inside it?" "I told you, it's just junk," I said, my grip tightening on the wheelbarrow. "Old papers, some tools." "Then you won't mind opening it," Dana said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "No," I said. The word was small, but it felt huge. Felt like a wall. "It's mine." The will was very specific. The shed and its contents. "Don't be ridiculous, Maya," Claire said with a sigh, as if I were a difficult child. "We're your sisters. We have a right to see what's in there. What if it's something of Mom's? Or something valuable? If it were valuable, you would have found it already." I shot back, the anger finally breaking through my carefully constructed calm. "You didn't care what was in the shed. You just wanted it gone." You wanted me gone. The truth of the words hung in the air between us. Claire had the grace to look away, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Dana, however, was unmoved. The shed is on our property, Dana said, her voice cold and precise. Anything you take from it has to be verified. We need to make sure you're not taking something that belongs to the main estate. It was a legalistic, nonsensical argument, but it was a threat. They could call the police. They could tie me up in legal battles I couldn't afford to fight, even with the money in the box. They could make my life a living hell. I was trapped. I looked from Dana's hard face to Claire's conflicted one. I thought of my father's letter. That fear made them hard. It made them selfish. I was looking at that fear right now. The fear of losing, the fear of not having enough. I took a deep breath. Fine, I said. You want to see? I'll show you. I knelt and worked the combination again, my fingers surprisingly steady. August 15th, 06. The day everything changed. I opened the lid. The morning sun illuminated the contents. The stacks of cash. Dana's eyes widened. Claire let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Claire whispered. Where did he get all that? Dana was silent, her face a mask of furious calculation. She was adding it up. She was realizing exactly what they had thrown away. He sold things, I said quietly, looking up at them. His truck, his tools. He saved it. For me, for you. Dana's voice was sharp, incredulous. Why would he leave all this for you and leave us with all the debt? Because he knew you, I said, and the words were not angry, just tired and true. He knew you would take it. He knew you wouldn't take care of me. He had to hide it. He had to hide me. The truth landed like a stone. Claire started to cry, silent tears running down her face. Dana just stared at the money, her jaw tight. This should have been part of the estate, she said, her voice shaking with rage. This is ours. It should have been split 3 ways. No, I said, and I stood up, closing the lid of the safe. It's mine. He left it for me. And you're not going to touch it. I made my choice. I wasn't just going to build a life. I was going to defend it. Starting now. You can't be serious, Dana said, her voice low and dangerous. She took a step forward. That money belongs to the family. It was meant to pay off the mortgage, the debts. Was it? I asked, standing my ground. The wheelbarrow with the safe was between us, a small green fortress. Dad's letter didn't say that. It said it was a foundation. For me, letter? What letter? Claire asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't answer. The letters were mine. They were the one thing I would never share with them. They were a private conversation with my father, a sacred space they were not invited to enter. You're not taking that box off this property, Dana stated, crossing her arms. I'll call the police. I'll call our lawyer. This is theft. It's not theft, I replied, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. It's my inheritance, and my lawyer, Mr. Davies, is expecting my call. He was Dad's lawyer, remember? He holds the trust. He knows everything. I was bluffing partly. I hadn't spoken to Mr. Davies yet, but mentioning his name and the trust was a calculated risk. It hit its mark. Dana's face paled slightly. She knew Mr. Davies. She knew he was meticulous, and that he had been loyal to our father. The idea that he was in on this, that it was all part of a larger, legally sound plan, clearly rattled her. What trust? Claire asked, looking back and forth between us, completely lost. There's more. Stay out of this, Claire, Dana snapped, her eyes never leaving mine. We were locked in a silent battle of wills, the birds chirping in the trees around us oblivious to the war being waged on the gravel driveway. I could see the conflict in her. The greed was warring with the fear of a legal fight she might not win. She had the house, the land. But this cash, right here, tangible and real, was a different kind of prize. And it was slipping through her fingers. What do you want, Maya? She finally asked, her tone shifting from aggressive to transactional. A cut? Is that it? You want us to buy you out? It was so typical of her. Everything was a negotiation, a deal to be made. I don't want your money, I said, and the truth of it surprised even me. A week ago, I would have done anything for a few $1,000s. Now, I had over 100,000, and it wasn't the most important thing. I want what's mine, the shed, the contents of the shed, and access to it. Unrestricted. Dana let out a short, incredulous laugh. You want to keep the shed? What for? It's a collapsing piece of junk. That's my business, I said. And one other thing, the deed to the 5 acres in the woods. Mr. Davies has it. I want it signed over. No complications. The color drained completely from Dana's face. She knew about the land. Of course she knew. It would have been listed as a minor, a liquid asset in the estate, something to be dealt with later. She had probably planned on buying it from the trust for a pittance once I was out of the picture. The land, she whispered. He gave you the land, too. He did, I said. So here's the deal. You let me walk out of here with my property. You give me a key to the driveway gate. You don't bother me when I come to use my shed. And you sign over the deed. You do that and you never have to see me again. You can keep your weekend house. But if you fight me on this, I took a deep breath. I will use every penny in this box to hire a legal team, and I will contest the entire will. I will argue that you and Claire exerted undue influence, that you manipulated Dad in his grief, and that you had me, a minor, illegally removed from my home under false pretenses. And we'll see what a judge thinks of that. It was a wild, desperate gambit. A story pieced together from anger and legal dramas I'd seen on TV. But delivered with the cold fury I felt, it sounded terrifyingly plausible. Claire gasped. Maya, we would never. You already did. I cut her off. Dana was silent. She was running the numbers. The cost of a lawsuit. The risk of losing. The public shame of having the family's dirty laundry aired in a small town. She was practical, my father had said. Her practicality was my weapon. Fine, she said finally, the word clipped and brittle. Take it. Take the damn shed. We'll sign the papers for the land. She turned without another word and stalked back into the house, the door slamming behind her. Claire lingered for a moment, her expression a mess of guilt and confusion. Maya, I'm sorry, she stammered. It was so hard after Dad. I know, I said, and I was tired of her excuses. Just get me the key to the gate, she nodded, looking like a chastised child, and hurried after her sister. I was left alone in the quiet morning, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had done it. I had faced them down. I had won. I leaned against the wheelbarrow, my legs suddenly weak. Victory was exhausting. A few minutes later, Claire reappeared. She didn't look at me. She just walked to the gate at the end of the driveway, unlocked it, and left a small silver key hanging in the lock. Then she walked back to the house and disappeared inside. I didn't wait. I pushed the wheelbarrow through the gate, pulled it shut, and locked it from the outside. I left their key in the lock. I wouldn't need it again. I had my own. I started the long walk back toward the town, pushing my future in a wheelbarrow in front of me. The sun was higher now, and the world felt bright and new and terrifyingly full of possibility. I had a safe full of money, a shed full of tools, a deed to a piece of land, and a business plan from my father. I had everything and nothing. I was starting from scratch, in a place that held all my worst memories and all my best hopes. The work was just beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and labor. I found a small, clean motel on the edge of town run by a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who asked no questions about the military safe I kept in the corner of my room. The first thing I did was call Mr. Davies. He sounded neither surprised nor shocked. He just said, I thought you might be calling. Your father would be very proud. Maya, the quiet approval in his voice was worth more than all the money in the safe. He handled the transfer of the deed for the 5-acre plot. As promised, my sister signed without a fight. The land was officially mine. It was a beautiful piece of property, a quiet, sun-dappled stretch of forest with a small creek running through it. Standing on my own land for the first time was a feeling I couldn't describe. It was like growing roots. After securing the money and the land, I turned my attention to the shed. I spent every day there, from sunup to sundown. The first week was just cleaning. I hauled out decades of junk. Rotted tarps, empty paint cans, nests of mice. I swept away thick blankets of dust and cobwebs. I washed the grimy windows until sunlight could finally stream in, illuminating the space. It was backbreaking, filthy work. But with every bag of trash I hauled out, I felt lighter. I was clearing away the neglect, the abandonment. I was reclaiming the space, making it mine. My sisters never appeared. I saw their SUV pull in on a Friday evening and leave on a Sunday afternoon. We existed in parallel universes on the same piece of land, separated by a few hundred feet of lawn and a chasm of resentment and misunderstanding. I never approached the house, and they never approached the shed. It was a silent, armed truce. Once the shed was clean, I started taking inventory. My father had been methodical. Every tool was there, cleaned and oiled before he put it away for the last time. There were hand-carved chisels, Japanese pull saws, and a collection of planes that were works of art in themselves. And in a separate, climate-controlled cabinet, I found the tone woods he had mentioned in his letter. Stacks of spruce, cedar, maple, and rosewood, all carefully aged and ready for use. He had also left books, dozens of them, books on woodworking, on joinery, on finishing, and a whole shelf dedicated to the art of luthiery. I started reading. I read about the physics of sound, the properties of different woods, the delicate art of bending sides and carving necks. I read my father's business plan. It was detailed and ambitious, but also realistic. It focused on creating a small number of high-end, custom acoustic guitars per year, marketing them through online forums and luthier conventions. He had even designed a logo, a stylized oak tree with a guitar body as its trunk. At night, in my motel room, I would spread the plans and the books across the cheap bedspread and study until my eyes burned. During the day, I would go to the shed and practice. I started with the basics, just like the books instructed. I learned to sharpen a chisel until it could shave the hair off my arm. I learned to make perfect, square cuts with a handsaw. My first attempts were clumsy, frustrating. I wasted wood. I made mistakes. More than once, I sat on the stool in the middle of the floor, surrounded by my failures, and wanted to give up. In those moments, I would pull out my father's first letter and read it again. I believed in you. The work was slow. Progress was measured in millimeters. But slowly, things started to change. My hands, once soft, grew calloused and strong. I learned the feel of the tools, the way the wood behaved. The shed, once a place of ghosts and sadness, became a sanctuary. The smell of sawdust became the smell of progress. The whine of the table saw was the sound of my future being built. I started to meet people. The owner of the local hardware store, a gruff man named Sal, started giving me discounts after I came in for the 10th time covered in sawdust. "Your dad was a good customer," he'd grunted. "Good man. Glad to see someone's using his old shop." Mrs. Gable at the motel would leave me sandwiches, telling me I was too skinny. I was no longer just a ghost in this town. I was becoming a part of it in my own small way. One afternoon, as I was struggling to bend a piece of maple for the side of my first guitar body, a car pulled up the driveway. Not my sister's SUV. An old, beat-up pickup truck. A man got out. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "You must be Maya," he said, his voice a low rumble.
I'm George Henderson.
"I lived next door. I was a friend of your dad's. He was the owner of the perpetually barking beagle. He told me about you," George continued. "Told me you'd be back one day. Said you had a good head on your shoulders and good hands." He was teaching himself how to build these. He nodded toward the half-finished guitar on my workbench. He was getting pretty good at it. I was his first customer. He walked over and pointed at a detail on the bracing I was working on. "You want to tuck that in a little tighter," he said gently. Like this, he showed me. He stayed for 3 hours. He told me stories about my dad, about his passion for the craft. It turned out George was a retired cabinet maker and an amateur musician. He had been my father's sounding board, his mentor. Before he left, he said, Your dad made me promise. If you ever came back, I was supposed to help. So, if you'll have me, I'll stop by now and then. See how you're doing." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a lump in my throat. My father hadn't just left me a plan. He had left me a community. He had left me a teacher. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I brought a sleeping bag and a pillow to the shed. I fell asleep on the floor, surrounded by the tools of my new trade, the scent of cedar and spruce in the air. For the first time since I was a child, I felt like I was home. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. The green of summer deepened, then blazed into the fiery reds and golds of autumn, and finally gave way to the stark, quiet white of winter. My life found a rhythm, dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the slow, deliberate work of my hands. The shed was my entire world. With George's help, I had run a new, heavy-duty electrical line from the main house's breaker box. A tense afternoon that involved a brief, clipped conversation with Dana about utility access, which Mr. Davies had already cleared and installed proper heating. The space was no longer just a workshop. It was a warm, bright haven against the winter cold. My first guitar was a disaster. The neck angle was wrong, the finish was blotchy, and it sounded more like a cardboard box than a musical instrument. I hung it on the wall as a reminder, a monument to failure and a testament to the learning process. My second was better. My third was better still. George was a patient and exacting teacher. He taught me the feel of the wood, the intuition that books couldn't provide. "You listen with your hands," he'd say, running his palm over a piece of spruce. "The wood will tell you what it wants to be." I learned to listen. I spent the money from the safe carefully, frugally. I bought a reliable used truck. I hired a local crew to clear a small section of my land and pour a foundation for a proper workshop and a small cabin. The plans were modest, but they were mine. Every nail, every board, felt like a victory. I rarely saw my sisters. The truce held. Their black SUV came and went on weekends, a silent reminder of the other life being lived just up the hill. One Saturday, as I was loading lumber into my truck, Claire walked down the lawn. She stopped a few feet away, looking awkward and uncertain. "It sounds good," she said quietly. "What?" I asked, confused. "The guitar. I heard you playing from the porch last night." I had been testing the resonance on my fourth build, a small parlor guitar made from a beautiful set of walnut my father had set aside. I hadn't realized the sound carried so far. "Oh," I said. "Thanks. You're really doing it," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "You're building them." "I'm trying to," I said. We stood in silence for a moment. "I read his other letters," she said finally. "The ones he left for us." He explained why he was so worried about the money, why he did what he did. I didn't know what to say. I had never considered that he would have left them letters, too. "He loved us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was just so scared for all of us. And he was right. About me and Dana. We were selfish. I'm so sorry." Maya, the apology, when it finally came, was quiet and unadorned. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I didn't see the glamorous, untouchable older sister of my childhood. I saw a woman who was wrestling with her own ghosts. "Thank you," I said. It was all I could manage. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was too soon for that. The wounds were too deep. But it was a start. It was a crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut for years. She nodded, gave me a small, sad smile, and walked back to the house. The interaction left me unsettled, but in a good way. It was a loose thread in the tight knot of my anger. The world wasn't as black and white as I had made it. My story was not just about my pain, but about theirs too. As the snows of winter began to melt, my fifth guitar was finished. It was made from my father's best wood. It was a dreadnought with a spruce top and rosewood back and sides. The inlay on the headstock was the logo from his business plan. The oak tree with the guitar body for a trunk. It was the best work I had ever done. Felt perfect in my hands. And the sound, it was magnificent. Rich, clear and resonant. with a warmth that seemed to fill the entire shed. George came by to see it. He played it for a long time, his eyes closed, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Your dad would have been damn proud of this one, kid," he said, his voice husky. "This is the real thing." I had followed my father's business plan, posting photos of the build process on a popular luthier forum. I had received a few comments, some encouragement. The day after I posted the final photos of the finished guitar, I got an email. It was from a well-known folk musician, a man whose records my father and I used to listen to. He had seen the photos. He had read the story I had tentatively shared about my father's legacy. He wanted to buy the guitar. The price he offered was more than I had dared to dream. I sat in the shed, the email glowing on my laptop screen, the finished guitar resting on its stand. The afternoon sun streamed through the clean windows, illuminating the floating dust motes like tiny, dancing stars. I had done it. It was real. I had taken the wreckage of my past and built something beautiful, something resonant, something that could make music. The inheritance wasn't the money, or the land, or even the tools. The inheritance was the possibility, the chance to create. The shed wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. It was a quiet place where I could grieve and heal and finally build myself. My story doesn't end here. In many ways, it's just beginning. The cabin on my land is almost finished. I have a waiting list for my next 2 guitars. The relationship with my sisters is still fragile, a tentative shoot reaching for the light, but it is no longer barren ground. And what I've learned through all this is that sometimes the things that look like endings are actually beginnings in disguise. The things that feel like abandonment are sometimes the most profound acts of protection. Home isn't always a house you are given. Sometimes it's a foundation you have to pour yourself on your own patch of earth. An inheritance isn't about what you are left. It's about what you choose to build with it. So I want to ask you, what have you built from the difficult things you've been handed? What shed in your life did you unlock to find a hidden strength, a hidden purpose? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe with all my heart that our stories are the most valuable things we own. They are our true inheritance. Thank you for being here, for listening. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe and be a part of this community. We're all just trying to build something that will last.